So we decided a few weeks ago to set travel as a theme, travel stories. And I started to think about different stories that I had. Some tourist stories with my family in Europe, different things, funny things, serious things that had happened. Some business travel stuff from my years on the road, shooting films, interesting things that happened, usually cultural clash in Asia and in other parts of the world. But there's another kind of travel that I think is really interesting to pursue, and that's when people leave their homes and they move to another city or another country or another continent. I'm talking about immigration. This is a story about immigration, and it's a cherished story in my family. About a little over 20 years ago, right around the end of the 20th century, my Aunt Evelyn and Uncle Saul had an extra ticket to a show. It was a Cole Porter review, and their kids couldn't go with them, and so they reached out to a group of Russian Jewish immigrants, recent Russian Jewish immigrants, who lived near them down on the peninsula. And their main friend there couldn't go herself, but she recommended a friend of hers, who my aunt and uncle didn't know, who she thought would really appreciate the music. His name was Alex Levy, and they picked up Alex. Evelyn and Saul picked up Alex, and he seemed like a nice enough guy, kind of quiet, spoke with a very heavy accent, which I can't really do. And they got to the theater, and Alex looked at the program. He said, "What show of Cole Porter is this?" He said, "I know all his shows, but I don't know this one called Review." And my aunt explained that it wasn't a whole show, it was songs from different Cole Porter shows. No dramatic setting, but just one song after another. But she was intrigued because she'd met a lot of Russians, particularly recent Russian immigrants, and very few of them knew anything about American culture, especially esoteric things like show tunes of the 30s. And she said, "Well, Alex, how is it that you know about Cole Porter?" He said, "Oh, I come from a very musical family. My mother was a piano player. I play piano too, but not like her." And my aunt said, "Really, that's very interesting. And where do you come from in Russia?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I grew up in Leningrad, lived there my whole life. My mother, my father, they met there, they married. That's where I was born. I lived there till I came here to California. I lived in Leningrad. But my mother wasn't from Leningrad. She came from a tiny little village. You never heard of it. It's called Velizh." And Evelyn and Saul were kind of shocked. And just then the show started and they couldn't talk anymore. But they were very excited to hear this because they had heard of Velizh. Because nearly 100 years before that, around the beginning of the 20th century, 3 teenage girls from Velizh had emigrated to the United States. Their names were Anna, Bessa, and Chippa. Anna was my grandmother. Anna was Evelyn's mother, my father's mother. Anna, Bessa, and Chippa were fleeing the pogroms. The Cossack soldiers would come in and they would rape and pillage and burn the villages and kill the Jewish people. And the family was eager to get. They had 3 passages to the U.S. One of the other daughters turned down going to the U.S. at the last minute because she had a boyfriend in Velizh. But Anna, Bessa, and Chippa came here. They got on a ship in Hamburg. They sailed. They sailed across the ocean, not with sails, of course. They rode in steerage, which meant they had no cabins. They were below decks in one big open area with poor food and no privacy and limited sanitation facilities. And they got to New York Harbor and they disembarked in Ellis Island, like most European immigrants. And they were kept in Ellis Island for several days, poked and prodded, their medical records examined. The immigration officials were very concerned that they have a sponsor in New York in immigration situations. You had to have someone who would guarantee that they would take care of you, so you weren't coming in and immediately going to be in poverty in the U.S. And after a few days on Ellis Island, they were released, and they went to Manhattan and Brooklyn, where they had family and friends, and they stayed in the New York, New Jersey area the rest of their lives. Never went back to Russia. Eventually had families, but they tried very hard to keep in touch with the family back in Velizh. And all through the 19-teens, through the World War I and the 1920s, they did keep in touch. They sent photographs, they wrote letters back and forth, they sent photographs of their new lives, their families growing up. The New York family sent back to Russia. They got back photographs and letters from the family in Belize. They, occasionally the New York family would send packages with books or clothing or packaged foods. And they tried to stay in touch like that, but they realized when the Great Depression hit in particular that things were not going well for the family in Belize or for Jews in Russia in general. They tried to stay in touch, but they were thwarted at many turns. One day they got a letter from a woman from Belize saying, "Do not write to your family in Belize anymore. They are under suspicion. Do not send them packages or books. They are under scrutiny. The secret police think that they are spies. They think all Jews are spies, and they are being watched very carefully. Instead, send your letters to me, and I will take them to your family. And if they have letters back to you, I will mail them for you. I am a Gentile. I'm not Jewish. I'm not under scrutiny. They won't suspect me." So this led to great consternation on the part of the family in New York. What to do? Should they trust this woman? If this was in fact a woman, they had no guarantee that this was a real person. They didn't want to play into the hands of the government or the police. So the correspondence back and forth slowed down, and eventually it ground nearly to a halt. And the family in New York, didn't think about their roots in Belize very much. And they had left behind quite a big family. Besides Anna, Bessa, and Chippa, there were 3 or 4 other siblings. The youngest was a piano prodigy named Sonia, and there were several other kids. And the mother of this brood of 7 or 8 was a woman named Bella. And the father, Bella's husband, the father of the seven kids, was named Meyer. And because he had red hair, he was known as Meyer de Geller, which is Meyer the redhead in Yiddish. And Meyer de Geller was a well-known klezmer musician. He played in klezmer bands at weddings and other kinds of occasions. And a great teacher of music. Taught all his kids music and was very much involved in Belize and surrounding communities. He was the place where people sent their kids for piano lessons and other instrumental lessons. Now, things kind of slowed down. The correspondence between the 2 branches of the family slowed down. But everyone in New York was startled to read in the New York Times around 1942, 43, that the German armies, on their way to invading Russia, had stopped in Belize and had stayed there for a while. And then one day, apparently under new orders, the Nazi soldiers rounded up all the Jews in the town, and they herded them into several barns, and they nailed them shut, and they set fire to them. And if anyone broke out through a window or a door, they were machine gunned to death. And in their very efficient, horrible way, the German army, in 2 days, managed to slaughter over 1,400 innocent civilians. Now, meanwhile, back to Alex. The intermission came in the Cole Porter show, and Evelyn and Saul said, Evelyn said, "So, Alex, you come from Belize. What was your mother's name?" He said, my mother was a concert pianist. She was a wonderful woman. I still miss her. Her name was Sonia." And Saul said, he was very shocked. And Saul said, "Alex, what was your mother's name?" "Oh, my grandmother. She should rest in peace. I can still taste her blintzes. She was a wonderful woman. Her name was Bella." And Saul said, "And what was Bella's husband's name, Sonia's father?" And he said, "Oh, my grandfather, his name was Meyer." And Evelyn and Saul got really excited, and Saul said, "Meyer de Geller." And Alex said, yes, how do you know?" And Evelyn and Saul were so excited, they were jumping around, and Alex got really excited too, although he had no idea why. And Evelyn explained that she was also the grandchild of Bella and Meyer de Geller, and that she and Alex were first cousins.
Oh, wow.
Now, after the show, they took Alex back home to his apartment. They met his wife, and he got out the photo album that his mother had left, that he had inherited from his mother. And in the photo album were pictures that Evelyn could remember seeing that her mother, Anna, my grandmother, there were pictures in Alex's album of that Evelyn could remember her own mother bringing with her from Russia when they emigrated. There were pictures of the New York family in the Valise album. And they knew now for sure that Evelyn and Alex were cousins. So the next few weeks were very exciting. Evelyn and Saul spread the word among the family. They enjoyed introducing Alex to different members of the family. One day they were driving down Foothill Expressway. They lived on the peninsula and down around Los Altos. They were driving down Foothill Expressway, and they realized that coming in the opposite direction were Alex and his wife. And they honked their horn, and Alex honked his horn, and they waved, and they thought, what a remarkable coincidence. And a few weeks later, the same thing happened on a different road. They're driving down the road, and there are Alex and they wave and they honk their horns. And they realized that in the 8 years that Alex had lived 5 miles away from them, they probably passed on the road numerous times without knowing. A few weeks later, there was a family reunion in San Jose. It was my Uncle Saul's 75th birthday, I believe. And they discovered, as they did a wider search for cousins, that there were other cousins, other descendants of Meyer DeGeller and Bella, who lived in Minnesota and had emigrated fairly recently and didn't speak very good English, but they came out for the reunion. And so my father and his sister, my Aunt Evelyn, sat at a table at this party with a group of Russian cousins whose very existence they hadn't even known about up until a few weeks before that. So my kids were trying to make sense of this. And our son Razi said, so Daddy, is this like if Danny and I didn't see each other for a long time and then we did? I said, no, what this is like is if you and your brother, God forbid, for some horrible reason, never saw each other again for the rest of your lives, and then 100 years later, on the other side of the world, your children met each other and realized they were family. That's what this was like. Thank you.